Hi American literature friends. This is a short video that goes over two Robert Frost poems, Mending Wall and The Gift Outright. Mending Wall is one of the longer, more complicated poems that's on our syllabus, and it is often connected to a sort of philosophical principle. One of the ways it connects to modernism, and Frost connects to modernism, is the understanding that there is something within the poem Mending Wall where he is talking about some kind of scientific or thermodynamic concept. We'll get into that in just a second. But first I want to talk through just the basics of the poem. Again, you see Frost here. This poem is from 1914, right before the beginning of World War I, one of his earlier poems. Let's see if we can get over here to the poem itself. Here we go. And this poem begins, and this is where the philosophical, the sort of scientific stuff comes in right from the beginning. The something that's the first word of this poem. Something there is that doesn't love a wall. And the scientific underpinning of this, the sort of philosophical underpinning of this that we'll come back to in just a second, is what that something is. Something there is that doesn't love a wall. This is the frozen ground swell under it. This is what he's talking about the seasons and about the ground freezing. Especially, you have to remember, many of Frost's poems are set in New England, so he's thinking about the harsh New England winters and the winter freezes and stuff like that. And then in snow, the snow melts and the sort of erosion and water running, melting out from under the wall. So something that like tries to wear down a wall season after season after season, with the ground freezing and then the spring water flow and stuff like that, spills the upper boulders in the sun, so the little chunks of the rock wall falling off, makes gaps, even two can pass abreast. So much of the wall has fallen down that two people could walk through it, one of the gaps in it. The work of hunters is another thing, so people hunting come through there and like knock down pieces of the wall too. I have come after them and made repair. So you got one of the people that owns the wall that comes back and tries to fix it, tries to put the stones back where they go, put things back in order. Where they have left not one stone on a stone, but they would have the rabbit out of hiding, the hunters hunting rabbits, to please the yelping dogs. The gaps, I mean, no one has seen them made or heard them made, but at spring mending time we find them there. And so he's like, nobody sees the rocks fall or sees these gaps being made, but every spring we come out and the wall, parts of the wall have fallen down, we gotta fix it again. I let my neighbor know beyond the hill, and on a day we meet to walk the line and set the wall between us once again. And so he and the neighbor that the fence, the rock wall divides, they meet one day in spring and repair the wall every year. We keep the wall between us as we go to each the boulders that have fallen to each. And some are loaves, and some so nearly balls we have to use a spell to make them balance. Stay where you are until our backs are turned. So he's talking about the rocks and how they wear down a little more every year. Some of them fit like a loaf of bread or like a brick, and they fit in there really nicely. Others are sort of rounded and they barely have to sort of balance on there. We wear our fingers rough with handling them. Oh, just another kind of outdoor game, one on a side. It comes to little more. There where it is, we do not need the wall. And then he gets to this other sort of question like, why do we keep doing this every year? Why do we need this wall? And his argument is they don't even need the wall there. He is all pine and I am apple orchard. So he's saying like it's clear where the property line is. I've got apple trees, he's got pine trees. There's no confusion about where the property line is. My apple trees will never get across and eat the cones under his pines, I tell him. He only says good fences make good neighbors. And so the neighbor is like, we've always had the wall. It's good to know where your property line is. We need to keep this up, keep things ordered and clear where things are. Spring is the mischief in me, and I wonder if I could put a notion in his head. Why do they make good neighbors? Isn't it where there are cows? But here there are no cows. He's like, we don't really need this fence. It's not keeping anything in. It's not keeping anything out. My pine tree, the apple trees aren't going to get out into the pine trees. Before I built the wall, I'd asked to know what I was walling in or walling out, and to whom I was like to give offense. Then he comes back to that first line. Something there is that doesn't love a wall, that wants it down. I could say elves to him, but it's not elves exactly, and I'd rather he said it for himself. I see him there bringing a stone, grasped firmly by the top in each hand like an old stone savage armed. And so he sees the neighbor. The neighbor's got 2 rocks. He's already back to working on the wall. He moves in darkness, as it seems to me, not of woods only, in the shade of trees. He will not go behind, his father's saying, and he likes having thought of it so well. He says again, good fences make good neighbors. And so the neighbor is sort of hanging on to tradition. The dad was like, we have to keep the wall, keep the fence, and the wall has always been there, and the neighbor wants to keep the wall there to make it clear, like who stays on what side, where the property line is, things like that. The narrator is more like, who really cares? We don't need the wall. It doesn't have any practical purpose. Who cares if it falls down? We know where the property line is because of the different kinds of trees. But the neighbor is like sort of likes the order of the wall there, and has this old sort of tradition of the wall's always been there. We're going to keep repairing the wall, keep making it stay up. The scientific principle behind this, the something there is that doesn't love a wall, this poem refers to a scientific principle that we now call entropy, and that was discovered in the early 20th century. And it's a complicated thermodynamic scientific principle. That has to do with thermal energy and the availability or unavailability of energy. But in a more general sense, entropy refers to the lack of order or predictability, the gradual decline of all systems into disorder. The entropy in that sense refers to the fact that things always fall apart. They never fall together. Like things don't fix themselves, they break themselves. Things don't get newer or nicer or fancier. They dull and decay and wear out. And the natural order of the universe is for things to wear out, not wear in and get better, but to wear out. And maybe more precisely, to wear down, to get weak, to weaken and fall into disorder, never to organize themselves into more order. You can see right here, the amount of entropy is also a measure of molecular disorder, or the randomness of a system. The sort of inclination of a system to fall into disorder and randomness is what entropy is, and that's what's happening here. The entropy is having its natural effect on the wall. The wall falls apart. It never falls together. Mankind intervenes and puts it back together every spring, the neighbor and the narrator fixing the wall. But something there is that doesn't love a wall is the sort of natural inclination of things to fall into disorder, the entropy. So in some ways, this poem is about this sort of scientific principle too. We're going to jump from that scientific principle to this more philosophical and political principle, which is Robert Frost's poem, The Gift Outright. This is the poem. Robert Frost was invited to read a poem at President Kennedy's inauguration in January of 1961. This is the poem that he wrote and read for it. This is a political poem about the United States and the relationship between the United States and the land of the country. Because as the title is The Gift Outright. The gift is the land, and the land is the sort of gift to the American people. The land was ours before we were the land. She was our land more than 100 years before we were her people. What he's referencing here is the sort of that gap in time period from the first colonists coming to the United States in the Pilgrims in Massachusetts, and then the Virginia colony in 1619, 1620. He's talking about that gap in time from like 1620 until the American Revolution in 1770. So he's saying we weren't ready to be Americans yet. We had the gift, but we weren't ready to be the people of the United States. She was ours in Massachusetts and Virginia, but we were England's, still colonials, possessing what we were still unpossessed by. So we hadn't risen to meet the land yet. Possessed by what we now no more possessed. Something we were withholding made us weak. That sort of like revolutionary freedom and democracy. Until we found out it was ourselves we were withholding from the land of living. And forthwith found salvation and surrender. So we surrendered to the land and became its. Such as we were, we gave ourselves outright. The deed of gift was many deeds of war, and this sort of acknowledgement that becoming the United States and becoming citizens was this sort of bloody, violent process that did involve war before we could be deserving of the land of the United States. To the land vaguely realizing westward, again, he's referencing how we sort of colonized the country, moving westward from the East Coast, west across the continent, but still unstoried, artless, unenhanced, such as she was, such as she would become. The unstoried, artless, unenhanced, he's referring to the common perception, especially in Europe, the much more sort of civilized part of the Western world at that time, that the people that settled the United States, the first United States citizens, were these sort of rough pioneers and cowboys and people like that who weren't like literary and sort of high-minded and like deeply cultured and civilized, but those are the kind of people that belong to the land, and the land belonged to them, and those are the kind of people who made the United States. Such as she was, such as she would become. So part of what is happening is this ongoing process of the land and the citizens like working with each other. The United States is this sort of gift, but to be deserving of it, you have to be this kind of good citizen, is what this poem is about. You have to be deserving of the gift that you get outright by being born here. So that goes over Mending Wall and the gift outright. Mending Wall, this sort of philosophical, almost scientific poem, even though on the surface it's just about these two neighbors getting together to put up the wall. The gift outright, this much more sort of philosophical and almost patriotic poem about the relationship between the land and the citizens in the United States. So that gives you two of Frost's more deep, layered poems. If you have questions about either one of those, or want to dig in more, know a little bit more about like Frost reading the gift outright at President Kennedy's inauguration, it's pretty easy to find videos of that online. But if you want to know a little more or have questions about either of these, get in touch with me and I'll be happy to go through them with you. Otherwise, thanks a lot. Have a good day.